I'm Matt Glaser, and this is Coffee Talk.
Hi everyone, I'm Kim Perlak. I'm the chair of the Berkeley Guitar Department, and welcome to another Coffee Talk. We're joined as usual by our assistant chair, Sheryl Bailey. Hey Sheryl.
Wow, I don't need any more coffee after that introduction by our guest. So, yeah,
And
let's
you'll all get
go.
you're gonna meet him in a minute. Ben Cody's here as usual. Hey Ben.
Hi.
Hey, and our guest who's bringing energy to us today is Matt Glaser. Matt Glaser. Hello.
Well, hi. Thank you for having me. This is so exciting.
And Matt is the director of the American Roots program here at Berkeley, also the former chair of the string department and a professor of all things American Roots. We're really glad to
Yes.
have you here with
So
us.
great to see everybody. How's everybody doing today?
We're doing pretty good. I've got some hot water today, right
Okay.
now. I'm hydrating and staying out from the cold. Matt, are you drinking coffee or tea today?
I had my coffee earlier and now I'm drinking some lovely Assam tea. What's
Ooh.
everybody else? Cheryl, you're having water, Cheryl?
Yeah, I'm hydrating, but I definitely did my hardcore espresso morning, so I'm good.
Okay.
And Ben, what are you consuming?
I'm the odd one out right now. I don't have anything. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Oh my God. So Matt, what's your routine? What's your coffee routine? That's the first question that everyone speaks to.
Well, I want to redo my entire life because I didn't really start drinking coffee until a few years ago. And I feel like I wasted decades by not drinking coffee. So I want to go back and redo the whole thing. I make cold brewed coffee every night with low acid coffee beans that I grind and I put them in water in the refrigerator overnight. And that cold brew also is lower in acid and higher in caffeine. And I look forward to that every morning. When I go to sleep at night, it's like Christmas Eve. Dreaming about waking up and having the gift. The gift is coffee. And
Wow, you're really in the right place here.
I
This is
got into it from Bela Fleck, who one can describe as a machine for turning caffeine into banjo music. And he and Edgar Meyer were in Boston, and I went with them to a coffee place, and I was like, oh, all these amazing musicians are really into coffee. I better get up to speed.
that's so was there a specific recommendation that they made, or did you just try something and think, okay, that's it, or see them
They
do it?
went to some fancy place, the name of which is escaping me, but of course they had esoteric, specific location, Ecuadorian, only at this height and only in these months, and has to be prepared specially. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah, and that suits you, right? Yeah.
I, I like esotericism. Yes.
I love that. Okay, so here's another question that a lot of our listeners from Berkeley are, they're very close to or about to have their first day at Berkeley. And you've had a number of different first days in all your years here. And was there something that kind of stood out to you about any one of those first days? Like first day here ever, first day in the Roots program, like anything that kind of jumps out about what it felt like to be here?
Well, I came to Berkeley. I first did a clinic with the flat picking guitarist Russ Barenberg at Berkeley in maybe 1979 or 80.
Mhm.
And afterwards, I got a letter from the school saying, we're looking to revamp our string department and grow it. And might you be interested in a job? And I was 24 years old and I didn't have a bachelor's degree. And here, Berklee College of Music was offering me a job potentially. So I came up to and had lunch with Bob Scher, Lee Burke, Matt Marvulio, Larry Bayonne, Dick Bobbitt, a few other people. And I got this job. And that Thai restaurant we had lunch at is still in existence, but all those people are deceased. So,
Oh, not Larry. Larry's with us.
excuse me.
Larry Bayonne is here.
Oh, Larry Monroe, I meant to
Oh,
say.
Larry Monroe. Okay. Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't have lunch with
Okay.
Larry Bayonne.
Yeah.
Larry Bayonne is very much alive and well. Larry Monroe,
Mm.
7 people who are no longer alive.
Wow.
We went out to lunch, and then I went back and I was interested in early jazz, and I said to Joe Viola, the chair of the woodwind department at that time, who is also deceased, "Where do you keep the Fletcher Henderson and Jimmy Lunsford charts?" And he said, "Oh, nobody cares about that stuff around here," which has proven to be true. So that was my first day at Berkeley. I learned things about Berkeley that have proven to be true to me,
Mhm.
which is that I always say that at Berkeley, Charlie Parker is like the caveman at the dawn of time who invented fire. And there's no other music prior to that. Charlie Parker is like at the beginning of 2001. Everything goes back to him, and there's no understanding or awareness of any music prior to 1940 something. And so that's been my great interest, is this music in the first half of the 20th century. As I
Mhm.
often say, I'm only interested in music of dead people. If you're alive, I'm not interested in your gigs or anything like that.
Well, you can come over to the guitar department because we go back farther. We're right there with you. We're gonna run the gamut, man. You know, especially me. Like I'm there with you in the past, bringing the past into the future.
Yeah, that's one of those things on the poster, right? We learn from the past to create the future. I like that part.
I love that. I think it's fascinating because because I was so into roots music as a kid and then
Oh,
classical guitar. I mean, that's how I got into classical guitar because I was a fingerstyle guitar player at the
oh, I
roots.
didn't realize that.
Yeah,
Wow,
I would when I started when I was 10 and my guitar teachers were the wonderful guitar players who played with Arlo Guthrie and his band.
amazing.
Yeah, because they were all based in the Berkshires, and we moved there when I was 7 from Central Mass. We moved out to the Berkshires, and then I just begged for a guitar, and my parents helped me find one when I was 9 years old. And the teachers that I met through my
What were the
mom,
names of these people who played with Arlo Guthrie?
they're Rob Putnam and David Grover and his brother Phil. David's brother Phil. David's now passed away. His brother Phil was one my first teacher. And then
Wow.
Rob Putnam, who's an amazing player and still playing quite a bit out there. And so I had them and they taught me all the stuff. And then I got more and more into it. And then when I mean, my understanding of what was happening is limited because I was a kid, you know. And then when they were like, obviously, I would think they went away, but they were obviously touring, right? And then I ended up with a teacher who was also amazing, Susie Higgins, and she had a roots and classical background
Hmm.
at with some of the top classical teachers. And then there were just so many things I wanted to do with my right hand and my tone. And that's kind of how I got into classical
Wow.
music. So my point in this telling the story was that I had heard you play on recordings and things like that because I was just into fiddle music and into Jay Unger and into all the things. You know what I mean? So I knew of you when I came to Berkeley, I knew of you as a player. And I think a lot of people here know you as the director of the Roots program. And so it would be really fun to hear just your perspective on like what aspects of you as a player and a musician did you feel like really you were able to bring or got creatively fostered as chair of the string department and now as director of Roots? Like what became threads for you as a performing and recording artist?
Well, as you're talking about it, one thing I just want to say is that, the musical culture of Berkeley has changed a great deal over many decades. And when when I got here, the to admit that one played bluegrass or folk music would have been the most shameful thing that you would never say to anybody. I was like, it would be the most shameful part of myself to admit that to people. I would kept that hidden. And now, of course, it's the opposite in a way that all kinds of things that had been kept under wraps or not really appreciated musically
Mhm.
have gone crazy and exploded at Berkeley. And it's a fascinating thing. Part of that, I think, I'm curious from a guitar standpoint, the acceptance of rock and roll guitar and development of rock and roll is the first big thing. And maybe this is the intersection of the capitalist mindset or business mindset of the bosses of Berkeley. Like, we got to do this music, even if the jazz people don't like it because it's got good economic payback. And then that opened the floodgates to all kinds of music. It's like, okay, we're just opening the doors wide, and whatever music you're into, as long as you have a checkbook, we're into it.
I mean,
Yeah.
from my perspective, being a kid, the big music festival near me was in Connecticut. The home base was in Connecticut, but it was an international festival, and it was called National Guitar Workshop, even
Oh,
though
I've heard of
they
this.
have
Yeah, yeah.
campuses
And
all
that
over.
had like Jim
And-
Hall and
and-
Stephen Grossman and
yeah.
all kinds of people, right?
Yeah, and that they always put, so I guess classical guitar could also be seen sometimes limiting in terms of scope, like jazz, in terms of like what's acceptable. But
Yeah.
like when I was learning it, I wasn't, first of all, learning it from teachers who thought that way.
So you
And
had your teachers were broad-minded.
they were totally open-minded and broad-minded and did many
Oh,
things and encouraged many things. And then at the workshop, they would have like classical week at the same time as the roots week. So
beautiful.
I would go to study classical guitar, but that's how I met John Knowles, and that's how I met Paul Rochelle and Annie Raines, and that's how I met
Wow.
Woody, and that's why I knew all those people when I came here. Like
Oh, this is
I
fascinating.
had studied when I saw Paul again for the very first time, he looked at me and he goes, "Oh wow, I think I know you." And I said, "You do?" And he goes, I said, "I was your student." And he goes, "Were you my student when I would roll around on the chair with wheels and yell at people?" And I said, "Uh-huh." Yeah, that was me. I was in that class, because you get so excited. And so we were cross-pollinating all the time. And like Scott Tennant from the LA Guitar Quartet, they were huge then. He was learning banjo. Tony Trishko was there. You know what I mean? And we would go every summer. So we would also share some concerts. So that was just very natural to me. And then I think coming here to Berkeley, kind of in the Larry Bayonne era, who was our chair for so long, Larry was a person who was, from the time he started, really in the, around 1990 was when he really started. He wanted to expand. I think the school might have been into it for all kinds of different reasons, but Larry wanted to honor what was out there and also made an effort to go and find people who had maybe studied at Berkeley when it was more conservatively jazz only and said, "Would you come back and teach what you didn't have the opportunity to learn?" And so I think our department has that culture, and Sheryl has it for sure. Sheryl it ha brings that kind
One
of.
thing I want to say is I want to dissuade people from believing that these words have any intrinsic meaning. Like
Mhm.
I always say that keep in mind a lot of these words are so that somebody in Tower Records could put things in bins to sell things. And there's music that's called jazz that there's aspects of jazz that are more dissimilar to each other than jazz is from classical music or from other kinds of jazz from folk music, or different kinds of folk music are closer to different kinds of classical music. So the fact that we think these words have any intrinsic meaning is dangerous because it's a word describing music, and the music is vaster and more rich than the words that describe this music. So I'm interested in getting people to learn as much music as possible, to listen to as much music as possible. To me, an educated musician is the person who's listened to the most music, has heard the most music, and engaged with the most music. That's what I'm really trying to get. So that's why the Roots program is like very broad. All the music that happened in America in the first half of the 20th century, with the possible exception of like Arnold Schoenberg living in Los Angeles, or Western classical music in America, that let's leave that aside. Everything else is like, and then you begin to realize how vast this world of music and art is.
Well,
It's
yeah, and
so vast. There's so much great stuff. And
Mhm.
I have an adversarial relationship with a lot of my students because they're very like they're into their thing. Uh, and I'm trying to get them to listen more broadly. Uh, So I don't know how that, if what you guys think about that from a guitar standpoint, but
I'll share what I think, and then I would love to hear Cheryl's thoughts. I think in guitar you can't cast aside Western classical music because it sits right. There's not one fingerstyle guitarist that wasn't influenced by classical guitar. And a lot of that is because the very first ever guitar method book in any style written in America was written by Justin Holland, who was a black classical guitarist who wrote the book during the time of slavery. And because he was so popular and because that book that he kept revising and then got reprinted until after his death, decades into the early 1900s, I think 1910 was the last one. What they can trace back now for sure is that, and a little bit because there were no copyright laws, so many of his arrangements and directives on how to use your right hand ended up getting photocopied and disseminated. And we can see that it influenced John Hurt. It influenced all the Nashville pickers. It influenced, so Chet Atkins, who obviously came much later, he was very influenced by classical guitar to the point where he would played on a lot of classical guitar festivals. And John Knowles, who is
it's
the keyboard.
amazing. So
Yeah.
you've just illuminated that I'm
Yeah.
even being more restricted. I'm trying to be very broad, and I'm still being too restrictive by.
Yeah, and because it's cool, because there are, but I think what happens is sometimes people want to take something and it's kind of like what you said about music stores, oh, file under,
Yeah,
whatever style. But in reality,
that's not how music
my
works. And people hear things, and
yeah, and then
wow.
because we're friends and because we're sharing music, then musical style actually develops differently and
Mm.
becomes more inclusive if people are more inclusive. And so I think my
Yeah.
story of sort of like I just saw classical guitar as another kind of fingerstyle guitar. And so did everybody I learned from, whether they were from classical guitar or roots guitar. Um, that informed all of my music and perspective. And I think it was because of the way some of these festivals worked for certain generations that was more common. And now I think it becomes more restrictive in a weird way because there's more access, but
Mm.
everything's algorithmically driven. And
Mm.
so, I couldn't, I was from such a small town. I was the only musician in my high school class. There were only 70 of us at this little Catholic high school. And so I had to go to things to see music, and they just had everything together for guitar. So I was
Mm.
like, oh, look, all these things are connected. You know what I mean? And everybody says that. And then, by the time I realized that people didn't think that, I was already enmeshed in it to the point where that was my center. And I really felt like, oh, I'm an American guitarist.
Mm.
I just fell in love with the classical style. At that time, that was my greater love, as I got older and went to school. But I never lost.
Sheryl, I'm not sure that I know your background as it is it whether it's similar to Kim's or
No, no. I mean, yes and no. I mean, but what I was gonna say, well, you wouldn't remember me because I was very shy when I was a student at Berkeley, but I was in one of your classes. I think it was like a world music class.
well, I used to teach a world music survey class of some
Yeah,
sort.
yeah. And it was great. And I still actually the other day you played the Pygmies. The Benzes that like whenever I have to teach someone about how to play in 3/4, that's what we listen to. And I've got that from you, and I still listen to it all the time because it's just grooving so hard.
I
But
always shudder when somebody says they had me as a teacher because inevitably there's some way in which I said something obnoxious or was
no,
an
no, you
idiot
didn't
or a
say
mis
no. I don't
was
I
it
don't
was it was
remember.
it
There was nothing
I
obnoxious. It
was
was
a jerk to
no,
somebody and
no,
everybody has a story. Oh, you were a jerk to me. You yelled at me. You blah, blah, blah. So
no.
thank God at least there was some music.
No, no, that really, but what you're saying, I love this about, yes, when people come up to me on the street and go, what style do you play, or what kind of music do you play? I always just say, good music. And now they
Mm.
think I'm being a little smart ass because I have that reputation, but I'm actually serious because
Mm.
I've never seen it that way as,
Yeah.
you know, now my background might come from classical musicians and professional
Oh.
musicians. And I
Wow.
was like the odd one because I wanted to play electric guitar because I wanted to be a rock star. when I was a teenager. But, so I mean, but it just always like it was this thing of this is a beautiful sound and I love it.
Mm,
And so
mm,
I think this what you're talking about in terms of working with your students is really, yeah, there are things I do. Like I will work with Jerry Bergonzi or George Garzone or people like that. I guess we call them jazz musicians, but really we're playing music that sound and making sounds that are sound beautiful to us. It isn't a
mm,
comes from a tradition that we understand and we study, but ultimately I just see us in the world as musicians that, yeah, we know that it's just to put it in the bin at or whatever at the old Tower Records. We know that this is contemporary, this is bluegrasses. It's just for that. It's not for
mm.
the I never feel those labels are for us the musicians. It's for the other people outside of us. So
Cheryl and Kim, do you guys play together? I don't think I've ever seen you guys as a duo or something.
We did
we have,
once. Yeah,
yeah.
we have. We
So
have
we
played.
we had the the registration shark video.
What is that?
Listen, we have a video that has a bunch of hits on Instagram because we reharmonized the Jaws theme and we had a flying shark, a stuffed animal, to convince people to sign up for final exams
Wow.
because no one was signing up. And so we thought, let's grab their attention. So we did this really silly thing and it got like 26,000 views. And then I don't know if it helped anyone sign
I
up for
don't
final
know, but
exams.
we're taking it pretty out there now.
But we took it out. But we played, we've done two performances together in 5 week where we meld our thing together.
Mm.
That's been fun. Yeah. So, yeah.
We didn't mean to shock you with the registration shark story,
Amazing.
but
So
Don't do
I was thinking
anything. Yeah.
about guitar players. I mean, so I played guitar. I'm coming back now to my origins because of all this Bob Dylan stuff that's going on. And the first thing I wanted to do was play guitar and sing like Bob Dylan. When I was in elementary school, I had a harmonica around my neck and I played for my elementary school thing. And then a few years ago, I got to sit in with Bob Dylan. He and his band were watching the Ken Burns jazz documentary on their bus, and I knew the guys in his band, Larry Campbell and Tony Garnier. These were guys from the New York City folk scene largely, who had been in Bob's band for a while, and they were watching the documentary. And Larry and Tony said, "Oh, that's our friend Matt. We know him." And so Dylan said, "I want him to sit in tonight." And I came to hear them play, and I talked to Larry and Tony backstage. And then after I went back to my seat, some guy came up to me and said, "Bob Dylan wants you to sit in." And I said, "I don't have a fiddle." They said, "That's okay. Larry Campbell has a fiddle. He's a multi-instrumentalist." So I sat in on two tunes, and now that's on a bootleg album. And I played like a lot of bebop licks all over his vocal, and I'm sure, it's really terrible. It's like, but so I know, he had my phone number. He could have called me if I did a good job. I never heard from them subsequently. But the only time he talked to the audience that night, it was at Boston University, was to introduce me. He said, "Next, we want to get someone. He plays the violin and a lot of other things. He teaches at Berkeley, Matt Glaser." So you get to hear Bob Dylan say Berkeley.
That's
But
awesome.
so now that with this movie about him, I've gone back and I don't really know his music very well, but it's an amazing thing. It's totally unique body of work. And he's really a great idiosyncratic guitar player. I was going to play a little bit like on uh It's All Right, Ma, I'm Only Bleeding. It's just him and the guitar, and he's really grooving like crazy. And he has very limited chops in a certain way, but he has this vision of everything he wants to do. And he kind of embodies what we're talking about. He absorbed, and he talks about this in his Nobel acceptance speech, he absorbed so much in American music. And his original songs were just really him trying to get on the groove with these songs that he had learned. He said he was just trying to write things as weird and as interesting as these folk songs that he had learned from the black tradition, from the white tradition, from, the Harry Smith anthology. And there's all this video now of him and Joan Baez at parties singing Webb Pierce country songs and, Leadbelly, of course. And so this combination of all these American musical styles and then this incredible lyrical uh, Harvard professor is now talking about Bob Dylan's songs as being equivalent to Shakespeare and T.S. Eliot. Uh, I feel like that's an image of an artist that Berkeley doesn't properly address. We don't really address it properly because he's using all these tools and he doesn't necessarily have to have perfect mastery of any one of the tools to create something artistically that is really profound and long lasting. And everyone kind of accepts, wow, this guy can barely sing, he can barely play. And yet, when you put it all together, his power of communication and what he wants to express, which is purely internal, has reached so many people and continues to be something of great mystery. It's a mysterious, weird, complex artistic process. Anyway, so Bob Dylan, the guitar player, I probably he wouldn't pass level 2 proficiency, I'm guessing, but
Well, we don't know that. I mean, I think that's what's really important is that I think it's important to really think about what virtuosity is.
Hmm.
And I had a teacher once who made us make up definitions of what virtuosity is. And my favorite one was a virtuoso is someone who can do whatever they want, but they have to want to do it. And so
Hmm.
it's like, how are you really mastering what you are doing? And I think we
Hmm.
mistake that. We think when we say virtuosity, it means a specific thing. It means a
Hmm.
certain amount of velocity. It means a certain amount of cleanliness. But those are just two colors.
Hmm.
And some styles need that. They have to have that. And some things need other things, right? And so I think if you really think about like what are the aspects of your sound that have to be there to bring across what you need to do, and can you do that masterfully? And then what I always love about a lot of our session friends and our roots friends who come here, just because what you hear on a record, you could make an assumption that that's the whole iceberg, but it's often the tip. And
Hmm.
that's why it sounds so deep and beautiful. And so it's like going deep to be free and not making assumptions, I think. Because I think if you say, oh, that's so simple, and then you try to do it, you can't do it. You can't reproduce. What Bob Dylan does is really heavy. You know what I mean? Like you might know those chords and you might be able to fingerpick that way, but you can't get it to sound like that because there's a depth there that's virtuosity in its own
Well,
way. I mean, that's,
Kim,
you know.
you know what I also often think about that too was it transcends genre. You
Hmm.
know, I mean, I think there's some people like, Bob Marley. You could somebody say, well, I don't really like reggae, but I love
Hmm.
that. Or I think that
Hmm.
about Wes Montgomery. Like I could think of lots of people, I don't like jazz or I don't like jazz guitar. But when they hear Wes Montgomery, they go, oh, but I love that. Or Johnny Smith on the guitar.
Hmm.
It's just certain people, it doesn't really matter. Or Bob Dylan. I don't like folk music, but they hear that. There is something that is very um, special, I don't know, unique, something very powerful that really even transcends um, virtuosity in any kind of traditional sense.
It maybe, yeah, it transcends virtuosity, it transcends style.
Mhm.
It's like the people expressing themselves fully and like
Mhm.
Kim says, willing to commit to it.
Yeah, it's an
Maybe there are
authenticity.
people like this who are not famous. It's like you always hear about these primitive artists, or here's a guy, he worked at a post office for 60 years, and when he died, they discovered thousands of full color portraits. I'm just making this up, but there was somebody like this,
Yeah.
people who are artists, even though the world never recognizes them
Mhm.
necessarily. Bob Dylan could have been one of those kind of people, You could imagine somebody like Bob Dylan who never got famous, who wrote 4,000 songs with incredible lyrics, and he could not really play that well, but he managed to create a world of expression. And
Yeah.
that, again, like the words don't mean anything because, like, let's just take this limited field of bluegrass. What bluegrass was at the beginning, Bill Monroe and Jimmy Martin and the Stanley Brothers was this really expressive thing that was very raw. Now it's become the absolute opposite, where it's this incredibly slick, perfect, technically perfect people play, Bela, Chris Thiele, Alison Krauss, people who are comfortable playing with Yo-Yo Ma, James Taylor, whoever, any symphony in the world. That's so different than what bluegrass was 50, 60 years ago. Those people at the beginning of bluegrass could never have played with a symphony orchestra. They could barely play their instruments well. They had this incredible expressive power, expressive power. And then that got changed over the course of years. And now the people who play bluegrass are the most technically proficient on their instruments. They're the image of what a virtuoso is. Bela was just here with Zakir Hussain and Edgar Meyer in Archie's. They were here rehearsing one day and in Archie's place. And I said to Bela, you're playing with Chick Corea. He just won a Grammy for Best Jazz Instrumentalist with Chick Corea. I knew Bela when he was a 16-year-old. Tony Trishka and I were roommates in 202 Riverside Drive when Bela would come over, a pimply junior high school student who had just gotten a banjo, who I also was obnoxious to, and he remembers every obnoxious thing I said to him. Like nobody forgets the idiot.
Well,
Idiot
maybe you're transcending your obnoxiousness.
Yes, it's a style. It's my creative work. Being an idiot, being a jerk it's like Curb Your Enthusiasm, I guess. I was Curb Your Enthusiasm before Larry David. I'm the bluegrass Larry David, I guess.
I love it. I mean, I love it. I think what you're talking about is like there's stylistic authenticity and then there's personal authenticity.
Hmm.
And maybe you're mixing different styles and you have your own authenticity and then there's also eras, and I still will say, like when people say, oh, they couldn't play their instruments very well, what does that mean to you? Isn't there
Hmm.
something deep and beautiful and effective about what they were doing? You know
Yes.
what I mean? And so isn't that great playing? I mean, like I think what I love about really understanding music history in America and listening is challenging yourself about these biases we have. Like what is great? What does that mean?
Hmm. Hmm.
What about what if being great is being authentic? And how would that change if you just threw out like and dislike and you threw out good and bad and you just listened to something and said, is this authentic? Is this effective?
Yeah, and I always tell the story about at some summer string program at Berkeley, it was open to different ages, and there was this really older guy, maybe he was in his 70s, who had just taken up the viola, and he wouldn't have been able to pass any level of proficiency or anything. But I remember how into it he was. It was like life and death for this guy. He was playing with such limited technique, with so much power and intensity and concentration and focus. I remember the image like it was yesterday. I was like, oh my God, I wish I could play with that level of commitment and presence and concentration and life and deathness. You know what I'm saying?
I know, and I think this is the thing is the proficiency materials, like the vocabulary we use, those are tools.
Mm.
And but they're not substitutes. And they're not going to destroy your authenticity if you have more tools. You just get to decide what tool is what for what job.
Mm.
You know what I mean? But then you could do more jobs in the
Mm.
world. That's why now some of these artists can play with a symphony orchestra. Like Molly Tuttle can play anywhere in the world she wants.
Mm.
She just uses different tools for different contexts. And I think that gives her a lot of breadth. And it didn't mean that she lost her depth, as an example, right? Um,
But let me push back about this. I don't know. I don't believe what I'm about to say, but it occurred to me as a pushback to that, which is life is short and
mhm.
you have to make choices.
Sure.
Like there's never an end to the acquiring of tools. There could always be more. Like today at a string department meeting, they were talking about the harmony curriculum at Berkeley. I
Mhm.
felt like Oh my God, I used to know more a lot of this stuff, but I've not kept up with all aspects of it. And I should resign and go back to Berkeley as a freshman and learn the harmony curriculum. But I'm 68 years old. Am I
Yeah.
realistically going to do that? No. And
Yeah.
I just have to kind of, with the tools, is it a one size fits all where when you're young, you must always spend your time acquiring tools? What's the balance?
Here's what I think about this as a person who has multiple degrees, and then I want to know what Sheryl thinks. So, what I think is when you're young, if you go to music school, you should acquire the tools to learn how to learn things. Like for me, as a classical guitarist, like for the most part, for a long time, I didn't use all of the harmonic vocabulary and modal vocabulary that my like Ben is a rock player or Cheryl's a jazz player would use. But then more and more, when I would do that, it would really help my mind understand the fretboard. Like if I suddenly said, listen, I'm going to work on the proficiency material in D flat major, which we never play in classical guitar. It opened my ears. It
Yeah.
opened my way of seeing the fretboard. Now, when I write music, more different sounds come in there. And then also the thing is I feel like I'm a much better reader of my own style. There is a point though where I have to say like I'm my age now. I'm in my 40s. I'm probably not going to have enough time in my life given all the things I love to do to really learn how to like play over changes, for example. And that just is a reality of this part of my life, so I relate to what you're saying. And I think when you're young, if you make a determination like that too soon, you box yourself out of learning
Hmm.
how to learn things and expanding your ears. So, like, I learned enough things. Like, for example, in college, I had to be able to name all the Haydn string quartets, like by theme. I had to recognize every single one, and I can do it. I can also take you through music history. I could take you through, and you could pay me 10 seconds of anything from like medieval music to Mahler, and I could tell you what it was and why. Do I ever play Mahler? No, but that really helps me know the difference between what Mahler and Bruckner sound like. I know that. So, like, it's all about harmonic density and what instruments are used and colors and rhythms. And then I feel like that helps me hear all kinds of things I want in my music if I didn't train that way. Like, if I didn't cross train in college and grad school, then I probably wouldn't have the ears and
But
the.
then meet with Berkeley students, and
Yeah.
they know a lot of things. They are acquiring tools,
Mhm.
but they haven't. It's like equivalent to they've read the dictionary, they know rules of grammar. They've never read Shakespeare. They've never read Emily Dickinson. Blah 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 blah. So how do you balance the vast world of the arts and artistic
Mhm.
creation endeavor? Like I lit up when you said you know all the Haydn string quartets. I want to know that. I want to know that more
Yeah.
than I want to know my proficiency stuff.
I mean,
So,
listen,
but
they're
maybe I'm
young though.
old, and so uh,
Yeah,
how
but
do we balance that? Cheryl
I
has
think
to go
they're
yet for
young.
a second
Cheryl
about
has to
this.
jump in, but I think they're
Yeah.
young, and I did that for 15 years. I was in school for 15 years, as I was also touring and playing and whatnot. And I just, stayed up late a lot and went to the library and read a lot of things and listened to a lot of things and learned a lot of things that were hard. And then I keep learning new things that I think are hard on my instrument so that I can grow.
So
What do
how
you
about
think?
this? How about listen to music every day? Whatever else you're doing,
Mhm.
listen to some music every day. Is that a
Yeah,
simple way to do it? Like because you practiced all day long, you're working on your chops, then it's too late to play. You don't want to keep the neighbors up. So make sure you listen to some music or read Shakespeare or immerse yourself in the world of the arts for some amount of time every day so
I
that
think
you
that's
are
right.
fed from a spiritual and emotional and cosmic standpoint, not just the Home Depot aspect of acquiring tools, as to use your
I
metaphor.
agree. I think that's right. And I think use the Stan Getz Library website. We have streaming audio and there's millions and millions of tracks so that you're not like on
Mhm.
Spotify in an algorithm that keeps
Wow.
just feeding you yourself. If you
Oh,
go to if you're a Berkeley student, or if you're not a Berkeley student, go to your local library that has a catalog. And sometimes they're online and they're free if you're a member of the library
yeah.
and just go through and make categories like world music, American roots music before 1940, modern classical music 19, like 10 to the present, jazz in different eras. jazz after 1960 or something, and just kind of like check off, what you're listening to. I think that would be amazing. I mean, that's something I did a lot of. And I think reading books about music and biographies is really good too. Sheryl, what do you think?
Sheryl?
Well, I agree with all of that, and I miss, well, we came from the era of listening to LPs, and you'd get together with your friends and pass around, you'd look at the artwork, and I mean, I still do. I'm a big fan of vinyl, but I think what you're saying also, Matt, too, and Kim, even just reading, spending a period of time and finding something that you aren't familiar with, and listen, because really we are, as musicians, we can only play what we hear, right? You
Mm.
can only really play what you hear. Now, for me, when I was a student, I really worked on my ears because of that. And I would love to play the guitar. And I said, I don't care if I'm going to play in a country band or a rock band, I just want to work and play the guitar. So I wanted to work on those skills because I didn't know what was going to happen. So I kind of say that to, now also, though, I've had friends, and I'm sure you do, who were really already, they really knew what they wanted to do. I've always admired that it took me quite a while to figure out what I wanted to do specifically, or the music, or how I wanted to play. But so I came up in that way of just trying to learn as much about everything, and also just really trying to hear it and be aware of it so that I could do whatever came up. And I would be excited to do that.
This is so amazing. And I want to ride on what you just said towards this idea of something I always like to say to people is to check out the website Chasing the Bird, which is a Charlie Parker based website. And it has on it a page devoted to all the quotes that Charlie Parker played in his solos. So this, Sheryl, this refers to what you're saying in that what is a musician? A musician hears a lot of stuff and remembers it or is affected by what they hear. So Charlie Parker quoted, we know over 250 different specific musical things he's quoted on recordings. These quotes range from children's songs to every era of Western European classical music, from Bach through Ravel and Stravinsky, to popular songs of the day by Tin Pan Alley songwriters, Cole Porter, George Gershwin, by other solos by jazz musicians, by folk songs, Turkey in the Straw, Sailor's Hornpipe, The Girl I Left Behind Me. This is what it means to be a musician. Charlie Parker demonstrated what it means, because here's a guy who heard all this music, remembered it, and could use it apropos of the moments he was in, harmonically, rhythmically. And we have documentary evidence of all of this, because you can go to the website and click play, and they take exactly the moment where he quotes all of these little musical elements. So if somebody asked me, what is a musician? I would say a musician is Charlie Parker quoting. That means he has absorbed and remembered all of the music, and then he can use it creatively in the moment that he's in. It's mind-boggling to me. And the guitar player who comes closest to this for me is Gray Sargent, who maybe you guys know. Gray Sargent played for many years with Tony Bennett. He's a Boston area king. He also, I played a gig with him where we were playing a blues and a bee landed on his neck. And in the middle of the blues, he quoted, and then on to the rest of the solo. He quoted Flight of the Bumblebee going into A Sleeping Bee by Harold Arlen, all apropos harmonically, rhythmically, where we were in the song that we were playing. And nobody got it. Maybe half of the band even figured out what was going on. And then we went on to the rest of the song. And I went back and listened to the recording. I was like, this guy is a genius. And I've had many experiences like that with him, where he's heard so much music, he can use it apropos of the moment. Anyway, I just wanted to get in those two stories about amazing human musicians, one of whom is a guitar player.
And that's incredible virtuosity to be able to do that, no matter what tools you're using, that person
Wow.
has some chops, you know, some tools. Yeah.
And verbally, Bob Dylan does a lot of the same kind of stuff. Like he uses everything that he's read and learned in
Mhm.
his song lyrics. And now they're beginning to realize, he put out this song, Murder Most Foul, which is
Mm,
about the John F. Kennedy assassination. And
mm.
in it, it becomes a litany, a list of all these cultural figures, musical figures, Stan Getz, Oscar Peterson, all kinds of people, who you should listen to, what songs of theirs, kind of viewing the assassination of John F. Kennedy as the beginning of the end of American culture and how all of this great art that preceded it. It's really something you should check out.
Wow. That's amazing. Um, you know, Ben, there's a question. So there's a question that Ben asks every guest, and I think this is a really good time, Ben, now that we've cycled through so much great information. You want to jump in there?
All right, so what is a question that you think students should be asking that they maybe aren't thinking of asking?
The question they should be asking is, what Lester Young solo should I learn to sing? What Lester Young solo should I learn to sing? That would be a really good question for students to ask.
You know what's
Every
great is a lot of times we get similar answers to this question, but no one has actually said that one before.
because singing things that you hear is really great and it's good for everybody. And Lester Young was this amazingly lyrical, singable soloist that transcends any. One time he said, if I'm playing on a song at a jam session that I don't know, I hate when people tell me the chords, because if you tell me the chords, I'm going to start to play using my brain, and I don't want to play using my brain. I want to play using my ear. So he was really tremendous. Lauren Schoenberg, the executive director of the Jazz Museum at Harlem, said, you've really got to get the details of a Lester Young solo intervallically and rhythmically. And if you can sing along with a Lester Young solo, you're developing really deeply your ability to hear intervals and rhythms. When we have are we about ending here? Because I have one more thing I wanted to talk
Don't,
about.
no, I want to hear what you
Okay,
want
so the
to
last thing I want to talk about is something I have been obsessed with for a number of years, and I gave this keynote speech at the International Bluegrass Music Association conference about this melodic rhythm, the rhythms of melodies, whether or not those melodies are improvised or composed. So I'm always trying to look for ways to connect all of this American music. And to Kim's point, all of music, because these rhythms go back to Bach. But so um, the first key rhythm in American music is called the cakewalk rhythm. Boo bop ba da da, boo bop ba da da, boo bop ba da. Can you think of any song or solo or any bit of musical information that has that rhythm? There's if you can't, don't worry, it's not a problem. I said that to my class, and one kid said, "Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer." Boo bop da do da da. So that's one. The bridge to Turkey in the Straw. Do da 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 do da 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 do da 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 do da da da. The bebop guys moved it over by half an inch. Then you get ooh bop shabam, ooh bop shabam. That's on the end of four. Or boo bop ba da 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 ba da 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 dee da. The opening to Grooving High on the original Charlie Parker record. Then it's all over the place in folk music. It's all over the place in solos. The first Lester Young solo that he recorded in a recording studio on Shoeshine Boy, boo ba ba da da boo ba, Lester Young, Louis Armstrong, on and on. Then you have dop dee dop dee dop dee dop dee da. That's the other generating rhythm in American music. That's called the two-note secondary rag rhythm. Dop dee dop dee dop dee dop dee da. And all of these are just permutations of these 3/4 kinds of things from African music that have become embedded in American music through Black expression of all sorts. And then Irving Berlin absorbed this stuff and put it into his songs. And then George Gershwin did, and then it became part of popular song rhythms. So I have a whole, maybe I'll send you guys a link of it's a way to see that all of these styles of music in America are connected by this rhythmic matrix in the melodies. And that way you realize, oh, they're much closer. So then you listen to country music and jazz and ragtime and popular songs of the day, and they all share this rhythmic language that is unique to the United States, has elements from Bach and European music, but really it's like a seed got planted here and just exploded. And it's one way to feel a connection to all these styles. So you don't have to feel that Tower Records bin thing so much that we talked about.
Yeah, not just Tower Records, the algorithmic thing now.
Tell me about that. What do you mean that?
It's the same thing. Like when you listen to something like online, then the algorithm of that online service feeds you a thing that sounds like what you just listened to that it thinks you would like. It's terrible. And so you really have to, like, if you listen to music online, you've really got to be intentional about putting in different things. And that's why I think, like, if you have some kind of streaming audio that isn't that, that's
Screw
used.
the algorithm. The algorithm doesn't know what I know. It
That's
doesn't
what I'm
know. It didn't
saying.
work hard to learn that stuff
Doesn't
that
know what
I
I
know.
like.
I'm going to
Even
fight back against the algorithm.
Yeah, I mean, I confuse like Netflix and Prime Video and everything because I like to watch a lot of different things, and it doesn't understand that. It thinks you only
Yay.
watch one thing, you know?
Wow.
So that's what I would say to students too. Like, you know, there's a place for all the beautiful technology on your phone and in your computer, but then sometimes when you want to expand your list, you want to be the operator.
Wow.
Don't let your device be the operator.
Maybe
Oh.
that should be our new motto, defy the algorithm.
Yeah, you're the operator now. You know what I mean?
I'm gonna make up t-shirts, and you guys on this call will be the first 5 people to have the Defy the Algorithm t-shirts. This is the beginning of a huge thing. Musicians fighting back against the algorithm.
That would be great.
All right, I'm gonna do that.
Great. You know,
I'm gonna Google. Now the
oh my
algorithm's
God.
gonna. Do you want other t-shirts that are similar that look?
All right, it's time for final thoughts. Cheryl,
Yes.
what do you got for us? Cheryl, you go first.
No,
What?
this was so
Amazing.
fun. And I get all these years later to thank you for turning me on to those pygmies in 3/4.
Welcome.
Really, no, just shared it the other day. But anyway, this was really great. I love this conversation. It's probably one of my favorites, I have to say. Thanks for being our guest.
I loved it too. And Matt, you know, thank you for being an unknowing influence in my musical life before I even picked up the classical guitar and after I did. I really appreciate you for that.
Well, wow.
Yeah.
Thank you guys so much.
You're welcome. And Ben, what do you got? What are you thinking about?
Yeah, this is great. It shows, music is music. It's all connected. Don't worry about the labels at Tower Records.
Matt, do you have any final words for our listeners?
My final word is a question. Is there any more Tower Records? Does it exist?
No.
There's no
But
more
I
Tower
mean,
Records?
but the spirit of it, of the chopping things up, exists. And the thing I have to say that was great about Tower Records as a kid from the sticks was you could come here to Boston where it was, and take the escalator up, and if you were into it, you could physically look through and grab all different things. So you have
My
to
final
be that
thought is,
kid.
yes, my final thought is a story of maybe this will be like Sheryl talking about records. When I was a kid, I lived in Queens, and I would take the subway to Manhattan, and I would go to the Record Hunter on 42nd Street, and I would leaf through records. I remember it was dusty. I'm saying all this because it was a physically embodied experience to look for music. I would have to get on the subway. It was scary. I'd get off on 42nd Street, which was scary. I'd go to the Record Hunter, and then I'd leaf through these records and hold them in my hand. You couldn't listen to the records. And then I would use my hard-earned money and I would just randomly buy records that looked interesting, and I would get back on the subway and go home and put them on the record player and listen to them. So, as opposed to this instant gratification of everything in the universe is on your phone and I can immediately do it without any exertion on my part, it took an entire day for me to learn, to buy a record and learn about music. And I'm very grateful to that experience of embodied desire for music and having to go walk, travel, and spend money and take the record and go home and put it on. So
Mhm.
it's similar to the embodied experience of playing a musical instrument.
Yeah.
It's a physical act. It was a physical act for me to go and buy records. So I just wanted to tell that
Yeah.
story.
Do that, everyone. I think that's great advice for the end. If you're here in Boston, you can get on the T, which is not
Oh,
scary, and you could go to Brookline. You can get on the Green Line, the C line, and get off in Coolidge Corner and walk a few blocks down to Village Vinyl, which is a
wow.
beautiful record store that's run by the nephew of our dear friend Ralph Rosen, who's a great harmonica
Oh,
player and used to run the library. And Ralph's nephew runs this beautiful record store, and they have vintage record players too, and they'll come to your house like they came to mine and set it up for you.
oh, this
And
is amazing. Wow.
it's amazing. Like they found the same record player I listened to records on when I was a kid in the 70s, and they brought it to my house and set it
Oh,
up.
wow.
And
Wow.
so you can do that, and then you could go to the record store in your town or go to the library and just notice how many different things you pick up because you're looking at them, like Matt's saying.
Yeah, you might pick up this looks interesting.
Mhm.
This is fascinating. This one looks, I think I'll get this. Anyway, it was so much fun talking
Great.
with you guys. I really appreciate it. Have a great day, everybody.
Well, thanks everyone. We're gonna hang out a little longer, but everybody else will be with you on the next coffee talk. Cheers, everybody.